gunfire ripping through a quiet French village, boots hammering wet cobblestone, smoke crawling out of shattered windows like something alive. Then silence, a strange, ringing silence. German officers move through the wreckage, stepping over bodies, checking faces, and suddenly they stop. They stare. These soldiers don't look like the enemy they prepared for. They are black. African from Senegal. Men pulled from dusty villages and coastal towns, thrown into Europe's frozen hell. Captured Nazi reports would later call them unnatural warriors. Propaganda posters branded them savages. But that wasn't what truly terrified the Third Reich. What scared them was this: these men were beating them. Thousands of miles from home, African soldiers were standing toe-to-toe with Hitler's army, and winning. Their rifles cracked through German lines, their bayonets flashed in morning fog, their war cries echoed through forests that had never heard African voices before. Imagine it. Young men who had never seen snow, now charging through it. Men who spoke Wolof, Bambara, Serer, now shouting commands in French, their boots soaked, their fingers numb, their hearts burning. They were called the Tirailleurs Senegalese, colonial troops drafted by France. Farmers turned fighters, fishermen turned frontline soldiers. They fought in the Battle of France. They held bridges. They delayed tank columns. They bought precious time with their lives. And when they were captured, something darker happened. White French prisoners were sent to camps. Black African prisoners were often executed on the spot, shot in fields, killed beside roads, buried in shallow, nameless graves, no medals, no memorials, just silence. The Nazis couldn't accept that African soldiers had outmatched Aryan troops, so they erased them. Photos disappeared, records vanished, stories were buried. After the war, Europe rebuilt. Parades marched, statues rose, but these men, they went home broke, traumatized, forgot. Some weren't even paid. Their families waited for fathers who never returned. Their villages held funerals without bodies. And history moved on, or tried to, because the truth is dangerous. The truth says World War II wasn't just won by generals and tanks. It was won by invisible soldiers, by African fighters who bled on foreign soil and were erased because their bravery didn't fit the story. So why were their graves left unmarked? Why did textbooks barely mention their names? Why did the world pretend they were never there? Because remembering them changes everything we think we know about that war. And once you see them, once you hear their footsteps in the snow, a sunrise over Senegal, warm light on red dust, fishing boats gliding across wide rivers, drums rolling through villages at dusk. Young men wake to roosters and ocean wind. They herd cattle, they farm peanuts, they dream small, ordinary dreams, marriages, children, quiet lives. This is home. But above their villages, foreign flags flap in the heat. France rules their land now. Colonial banners stand where African kingdoms once did. And then the recruiters arrive, pressed uniforms. Polished boots, big promises. They speak of steady pay, of honor, of adventure beyond the horizon. They give these young men a name: Tirailleurs Senegalese, Senegalese riflemen. But that name hides the truth. These soldiers don't just come from Senegal. They come from Mali, Guinea, Chad, Ivory Coast. Thousands of miles apart, different languages, different tribes. Bound together by a war that isn't theirs. They train under shouted orders they barely understand. They march in tight lines beneath a flag that is not their own. They learn how to kill for a country that never planned to treat them as equals. Then Europe starts to crack. Hitler's armies surge forward like steel tides. France panics, France bleeds. And suddenly tens of thousands of African soldiers are loaded onto ships. Dark hulls, salt air, long nights on open water. They cross oceans toward a frozen continent they've never seen. When they arrive in Marseille, the cold punches through their thin uniforms. Their breath turns white. Their fingers go numb. Crowds gather, some stare, some whisper, some spit. These men who grew up under blazing suns now shiver on European docks. They're told they're fighting for freedom, but freedom was never meant for them. They're sent straight to the front lines. Given old rifles, worn boots, because expendable soldiers make convenient shields. They dig trenches in foreign soil. They sleep in mud. They wait under skies filled with distant artillery. And here comes the first realization: France isn't protecting them. France is using them. They are placed where the fighting is thickest, where survival is thinnest, where retreat is impossible. Young farmers, fishermen, village boys, now standing between Hitler's tanks and Paris. Listen closely. That sound isn't thunder, it's artillery. Those shadows in the fog aren't trees. They're advancing troops. And these men, pulled from peaceful villages half a world away, are about to meet war at full volume. They don't know it yet. But what's coming will expose the ugliest truths of empire and mark the beginning of a tragedy history tried to bury. Because once the shooting starts, the world will see what these African soldiers are capable of, and Europe will never look at them the same way again. Men who grew up under blazing suns, now crawling through frozen forests. Their hands, once calloused by farming and fishing, now wrapped around cold steel rifles. They learn to fight in pine shadows instead of savanna grass. They dig trenches in snow. They breathe fog into the morning air. At night, beneath bombed-out bridges, they share cigarettes. Quiet laughs, quick prayers, photographs of families folded deep inside jackets. Then the shells start falling. Boom, 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 earth jumps, trees splinter, history accelerates. Against impossible odds, they hold their ground. At Jean, at Amiens, at Lyon. They repel German advances street by street. They ambush Nazi patrols in narrow alleys. They charge through ruined homes with bayonets flashing, hand to hand, breath to breath. You can almost hear it, boots slipping on broken glass, shouts swallowed by smoke, the sharp crack of rifles echoing between collapsing walls. French commanders start to notice. When a line is about to break, they send in the Tirailleurs. When a bridge must be held, they send in the Tirailleurs. They don't complain, they don't hesitate, they advance. And something else begins to spread. Not orders, not strategy, fear. Rumors ripple through Wehrmacht ranks. These African troops don't retreat. These men fight until the end. German officers whisper their names like curses. Soldiers avoid sectors where black troops are deployed. Because every time they meet them, the outcome is brutal. Here comes the realization: these colonial soldiers, treated as expendable, are becoming the backbone of resistance. And to Nazi ideology, this is unbearable. Black men proving superior on European soil shatters the myth of Aryan supremacy. It cracks the fantasy of racial destiny. It exposes the lie at the heart of Hitler's empire, so the Nazis change tactics. They stop seeing them as prisoners of war. They see them as targets. They don't just fight them anymore. They hunt them, orders quietly shift. Captures turn into executions. Wounded soldiers are finished off. Fields become killing grounds. Roadsides become graves. Racism becomes policy. Imagine realizing that your skin color has just turned you into a marked man. That surrender no longer means survival. That bravery now carries a death sentence. Still, they fight, through exhaustion, through hunger, through terror, because retreat means slaughter, and standing your ground is the only dignity left. These men came to Europe as forgotten recruits. Now they are legends in whispers and ghosts in Nazi nightmares. But when hatred becomes strategy, when prejudice becomes a weapon, a white flag waving over broken cities, church bells silent, roads clogged with refugees. June 1940, France collapses in days, rifles drop, helmets fall into mud. White French soldiers are rounded up, disarmed, marched away as prisoners of war. But for African soldiers, surrender means something else, something final. At Chasselet, at Erquinvillers, at dozens of nameless fields that never made it into history books. German troops line them up, black prisoners on one side, white prisoners on the other. The white soldiers are spared. The African soldiers are told to kneel. You can hear it, boots shifting in grass. Hands trembling behind backs. A machine gun bolt sliding into place. Click. Entire units are executed where they stand. No trials, no paperwork, no mercy, just bodies falling into dirt. Photographs later surface. Rows of African corpses stacked inside ditches, some crushed beneath tanks, others stabbed with bayonets. Survivors will remember German officers laughing. Smoking cigarettes, stepping over the dead like broken furniture. Nazi propaganda calls them barbaric mercenaries. But the truth is simpler. They were brave men abandoned by the world, farmers. Fishermen, village sons who fought until their ammunition ran out and then died on their knees. And still, some survive. Captured Tirailleurs are shipped to POW camps across occupied Europe. Behind barbed wire, they shrink into shadows. They endure starvation, forced labor in frozen fields, medical experiments carried out without anesthesia. Their bodies weaken. Their spirits are tested. They write letters home, letters that never arrive. They whisper the names of their mothers at night. They dream of warm rivers, of drumbeats, of mango trees. Home feels like another lifetime. Yet even here inside cages, resistance grows, quiet resistance. They teach each other songs from Senegal and Mali. They hide prayers inside empty soup tins. They share crumbs like communion. They refuse to let their identities be erased. No guns, no banners, just dignity, just survival, just the stubborn act of staying human in a system designed to break them. But listen closely. This isn't the worst part yet, because beyond the camps, beyond the mass graves, a deeper betrayal is already forming, one that will follow these men long after the war ends. And when the fighting finally stops, church bells ring again, crowds flood the streets, Allied flags snap in fresh European air, France is free, African soldiers march beside victorious troops. Their boots strike pavement they once bled on, they pass through towns where their friends fell. For a moment they believe it. They believe their sacrifice finally matters. They helped push back Nazi lines, they cleared roads, they retook villages, they watched swastikas fall from buildings they had fought to defend. This should be their victory, but listen carefully. There are no parades for them, no brass bands, no speeches, no medals pinned to tired chests. Instead, they are quietly loaded onto ships, sent back across the ocean. Their white counterparts stay behind. They receive honors, photographs, handshakes from generals. The Tirailleurs receive silence. Back in Africa, they wait for the wages promised during the war. Months pass, then years, nothing comes, and then Tirailleurs, a dusty military camp outside Dakar, Senegal. Thousands of returning veterans gather, men who survived Normandy forests and Nazi bullets. Men who carry scars under their shirts. They ask for their pay, they wait, they negotiate, they protest peacefully. No weapons, no violence, just voices. And then before dawn breaks, French armored vehicles roll in. Orders are shouted, rifles are raised, gunfire erupts. Former heroes fall into red sand. Dozens are killed, some say hundreds. By the very nation they defended. Let that sink in. Men who fought fascism in Europe are gunned down by their own commanders in Africa. Their bodies are buried in secret. Official records vanish. Death certificates are rewritten. Families are told nothing. Mothers wait for sons who will never return. Children grow up without knowing where their fathers are buried. And just like that, history closes its eyes. No memorials, no national apologies, no compensation. Their story is erased with paperwork and silence. This is victory without justice. A war won on European soil and betrayal delivered at home. These men survived Hitler, but they could not survive colonial memory. A dusty archive room, flickering fluorescent lights. A cardboard box that hasn't been opened in decades. Inside, forgotten files, yellowed reports, photographs stamped classified, and suddenly the past exhales. Researchers start connecting the dots. Hidden mass graves, censored battlefield images, handwritten testimonies from men who were told to stay quiet. Survivors finally speak, voices cracked by age, eyes still haunted by gunfire. And the scale becomes impossible to deny. Tens of thousands of African soldiers fought Nazi Germany. Thousands were executed, starved, or erased. Not lost, erased. Whole units wiped out of records. Death certificates altered. Families left with nothing but rumors and unanswered prayers. This wasn't neglect, it was design. For decades, history textbooks skipped their names. Victory documentaries cropped their faces. Memorials showed white soldiers standing where black ones had fallen. Then, slowly, painfully, the truth begins to surface. France starts to acknowledge it. Statues rise in quiet plazas. Films tell stories that were buried. Archives open inch by inch. In 2017, pensions are finally equalized, 70 years too late. Most of the Tirailleurs are already gone. They died poor, they died waiting, they died without hearing the words, "You mattered." Their medals came too late, their apologies came too quietly. And here comes the hardest truth of all. These men helped defeat fascism in Europe, only to return to colonial rule. They fought for liberty abroad and came home to occupation. They bled for freedom and were paid with silence. Imagine surviving Nazi machine guns, only to be forgotten by the very democracy you defended. Imagine your grandchildren learning about World War II without ever hearing your name. That silence, that deliberate forgetting, may be the loudest crime of all. Because history didn't just overlook these soldiers, it buried them twice, once in unmarked graves, and again in memory. A hot sun hangs over a quiet village in Senegal. Mango trees sway gently in the breeze. Beneath them, men sit on worn wooden benches, bent with age. Their hands tremble as they hold faded photographs, faces of comrades who never returned. Names whispered like prayers. They speak softly as if the wind might carry their words to those who never listened. Fields in France hold graves, but no faces, no markers. Just dirt and forgotten stone. They crossed oceans. They fought in forests they had never seen. They charged through snow they had never imagined. They bled for a world they were never fully allowed to call their own. And now, decades later, their legacy lives in whispers, in classrooms that barely mention them, in history books that skip their sacrifice, in families still waiting for recognition. They were warriors without monuments, heroes without headlines. Men whose bravery was once feared and then ignored. Listen closely. Every quiet village gathering, every hushed name spoken beneath mango leaves carries the weight of a story erased. They fought fascism on one continent, only to be buried by history on another. Their courage lingers in the air, in the rustle of leaves, in the stories a few still remember. A battlefield after the gunfire fades, smoke thinning, boot prints filling with rain, and names never spoken sinking into the mud. This isn't just about World War II, it never was, it's about memory. About who gets carved into stone and who disappears into footnotes. The Senegalese Tirailleurs marched into Europe wearing foreign uniforms for a country that barely saw them. They crossed oceans to fight an enemy they had never met. They stood in freezing trenches, breathing fog and fear while the world debated their worth. They didn't just fight Nazis. They fought erasure. Listen closely, you can almost hear it, the rattle of rifles, orders shouted in a language not their own. The silence afterward, thick, uncomfortable, deliberate. They charged when others hesitated, held lines that were already lost, bled on soil that would never call them sons. And when the war ended, when parades rolled through liberated streets, their reward was a quiet dismissal. Lower pay, broken promises, mass graves without names, here's the shock. Courage didn't fail them, history did. Because bravery isn't loud, sometimes it whispers, sometimes it survives in bodies pushed past endurance. Sometimes it waits decades for someone, anyone, to look back and say, I see you. They didn't change history with speeches. They changed it with persistence, with discipline. With the simple refusal to fall when the world expected them to. Blood soaked their uniforms. Time tried to wash them away, but dignity held, and here we are, decades later. Still telling the war like it only had one face, one voice, one story. So the next time you hear about World War II, the victories, the generals, the flags, pause. Ask yourself, who else stood there, uncredited when the bullets flew? Who else paid the price for a freedom they were never fully given? How many heroes are still waiting in the shadows, not for praise, just for remembrance? Because remembering them isn't history, it's justice. And the final battle is whether we're brave enough to finally see them.